In 1939, a small company was born in a cramped little office. And out of that room, over the years that followed, a handful of writers and artists, paid almost nothing, running on caffeine and imagination, built something impossible. An entire universe. Heroes, legends, characters kids would tape to their walls and grown adults would line up around the block to see. Characters so alive that millions of people grew up feeling like they knew them personally. For a while, it worked beautifully. These heroes became part of childhood itself. Printed, collected, traded, adored. The company wasn't just selling stories, it was selling belonging. But here's the cruel truth this whole story turns on. Creating something the world loves and building a business that survives are two completely different things. You can own a legend and still go broke. This is a story of a dream, a collapse, and the greatest comeback in business history.
By the early 1990s, the company looked unstoppable. New owners took it over, listed it on the stock market, and decided to grow as fast as humanly possible. They bought a trading card company, a sticker company, a toy company, even their own distribution network. Empire building, fueled by debt. And the timing seemed perfect because their core product was suddenly red hot. A speculation frenzy had gripped their industry. People weren't buying their stories to read them. They were buying them by the stack, sealed in plastic, convinced these were treasures that would only go up in value. Sales exploded. Everyone got greedy, including the company. But it was a bubble, and bubbles share one trait. They always pop. The collectors realized the treasures they'd hoarded weren't rare at all. Millions of others owned the exact same thing. The value evaporated overnight, and a company that had bet its entire future on that boom was suddenly staring into the abyss. The crash was brutal. When the bubble burst, sales didn't dip. They fell off a cliff. The product that funded everything stopped selling, and all that debt from the good times didn't disappear. It became a noose, tightening month after month. Then the vultures arrived, billionaire investors and corporate raiders smelling a wounded company. What followed was an ugly, years-long war in the boardroom. Powerful men fighting each other for control of a company that was bleeding out. Each one grabbing for whatever value was left in the carcass. And in December 1996, it happened. The company that had created an entire universe of beloved heroes that had defined childhoods for generations filed for bankruptcy. Officially broke, drowning in debt, on the edge of disappearing forever. The heroes were still adored. The company that owned them was dying. And if you think that's rock bottom, it gets worse.
Here's where the story breaks your heart. To raise cash, just to keep the lights on a few more months, the company started selling off the one thing it had left. Its heroes, not the stories, the movie rights, the right to put these characters on the big screen. Their crown jewels, their most famous and beloved heroes, parceled out to strangers for upfront cash. They were mortgaging their own imagination. And the saddest part, they didn't even believe in their own characters anymore. They were convinced these heroes couldn't carry a film alone, so they let others take them for a fraction of what they'd one day be worth. The company that built the universe no longer believed it had any magic left. Think about that. They were so out of hope that they sold their own children and felt relieved to be rid of them. That is rock bottom. But somewhere in the wreckage, a new idea took hold. A small group inside the company looked at the deals they'd signed and realized something painful. Other studios were about to make fortunes off their heroes. The money was going to everyone but them. So they made a decision that sounded completely insane. Stop selling, stop licensing, make our own movies. There was just one problem. They had no money, and they'd already sold their most famous characters. All that was left were the heroes nobody else wanted. the B list, the leftovers. So they walked into a bank and made the most audacious bet in the company's history. They put up those remaining characters, the only family they had left, as collateral on a loan of over $500 million. The terms were terrifying. If the movies failed, the bank could keep the heroes. They were betting the last of everything. And the very first film, built around a character almost no one outside their world had ever heard of.
The film opened and the world stopped. The gamble, the desperate all-or-nothing bet on the heroes nobody wanted didn't just work. It detonated. It launched the most successful film franchise the planet has ever seen. So let me finally tell you who this is. The company that went bankrupt, that sold its children for scraps, that walked into a bank and bet its last heroes to survive. This is the story of Marvel. Yes, that Marvel, the most powerful name in entertainment on Earth. The studio behind the highest grossing films in history was, less than 2 decades before it ruled the world, a bankrupt comic book company selling off its own characters because it couldn't make rent. Everything you love about it today was built on the other side of total collapse. Now let me show you just how far they climbed, because the money is staggering.
And those heroes they'd sold off for scraps in the desperate years? Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, sold to other studios when Marvel was starving, which is the real reason it took years for some of them to finally come home. But the leftovers they bet at the bank built a kingdom. Once that first film hit, Marvel became a money-printing machine, building something no studio had ever attempted, a single connected universe of films, each one feeding the next, all climbing toward team-ups that shattered every box office record on the books. Then, in 2009, just 13 years after bankruptcy, the ultimate twist. Disney bought Marvel for around $4 billion. The company that couldn't pay its debts was now worth a fortune almost too big to picture. Today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has earned more than $32 billion at the global box office, the highest grossing film franchise in human history. And the bank never got to keep a single hero. So the next time you see that logo flash before a movie, remember what it cost. Remember that the most valuable hero factory on Earth was once so broke, it sold its own family for scraps and was convinced its magic was gone. Marvel's lowest moment wasn't the end of its story. It was the foundation of it. Every empire you admire has a chapter like this one. A moment where giving up would have been the easy, sensible, reasonable thing to do. They didn't. They put the last of what they had on the table and bet on themselves when no one else would. You can still see the scars today. The bill from rock bottom was real. But so was the comeback. The bottom is never the end of the story. Sometimes it's exactly where the greatest ones begin. That's the money behind the magic. This is Dollars Decoded. We'll see you in the next one.